Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. Currently, we are in Daniel chapter 11. Now, Daniel chapter 11, it's a very fascinating chapter. All of them are. I realize I say that. The book of Daniel, to me, is one of the most fascinating book of prophecy. And one reason because it it goes beyond just Israel, the prophecies of Israel, to global. And when you think about prophecies, now remember the Old Testament is divided into three sections. The historic narrative, which is from Genesis to, I think it's Esther, right? Genesis to Esther. And then you have the next section, which is the books of literature and wisdom. So that's from Job to Songs of Songs, as they call them, or in some of your Bibles, Songs of Solomon. And then you have the last section, which we are studying, which is the writings of the prophets. And the writings of the prophets are divided into the major and minor prophets. That's just something scholars have done. God did not make this distinction. And it's not, we're debating whether or not should they or shouldn't they not. Okay. But we studied the writings of the prophets chronologically. In other words, what were the oldest writings? And there's a reason why I did that, because if you go back in the section of the minor prophets, which starts from Hosea all the way to Malachi, there is a time frame with these. Now, each section, the books are arranged as best as the arrangers believe their chronological date. So when you get to the minor prophets, so the minor prophets around Hosea, and again, there's different debate, I guess, in terms of the dating. We won't get into that because we're not scholars. I'm not a scholar. But Hosea and Job is the earliest of the minor prophets. And the reason why we started with them is because the prophetic word, in other words, this was the time where God begins to ramp up his prophecies against Israel, to warn them, to turn them from their sins. He's warning them. And this is about around 250 years before the Babylonian invasion. So all of this time when you have Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah's not necessarily gives a prophetic prophecies as much as well, I take that back. It does give a prophecy. You have to understand Jonah's prophecies as it reveals Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. You come to Micah. Now, around this time, around Micah, is when, and then maybe Nahum, is when you're going to see Isaiah, the prophet, come along. And so he's around 120 years before the Babylonian invasion. And then right around this time, Habakkuk is around the time as the Babylonian Empire or the Babylonian invasion, okay, begins to kind of ramp up. Okay. Now, you have three minor prophets after, which we will get into this shortly as we are winding up Daniel. So the three post minor prophets would be Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. So now when we get back then to the major prophets, Isaiah, okay, the prophecies, and probably these books not only in length, but and some of the in-depth prophecies that they give. So Isaiah, and then, like I said, I believe somewhere around Nahum and Habakkuk might have been around this time as well. Then you go into Jeremiah's prophecy, which is the death of the nation. When we went through, when we studied this, we saw the death of the nation. We saw God pleading with Israel. They refused. And then so Jeremiah and Lamentations were the death of the nations. Ezekiel and Daniel were contemporaries. They were one of the first of the of Israelites deported to Babylon. Daniel, of course, rose in the government of Babylon. Ezekiel was a priest, prophet to the dispersed, the exiles. So he lived among the exiles. And so this is where we are with Daniel's prophecy. Now, the reason why I'm saying this is important is because the book of Daniel itself, if you remember, he gets to Babylon early on, and then he receives this. God gives Nebuchadnezzar this dream of a human form, a human statue. This human statue, as Daniel gives the interpretation, the prophecy, it is a prophecy of 5 world dominating kingdoms until the second coming of Jesus. Literally, Jesus will come back as pictured here. The rock comes made without hands, strike this image at its feet, which is extremely important. Strikes the image at its feet. Now that's interesting because it gives also a timeline of when this is going to happen. In other words, Jesus, the rock doesn't strike it at his legs, doesn't strike it in his belly, strike it at his feet. That's a timing. So this has not happened yet. But when he strikes it at this, and in Daniel 2, Daniel says it, in the days of these kings, meaning the feet of iron and clay, he destroys this image, which is the human statue. The human statue, okay? He destroys this image. Okay. From a timeline, and I think this is important. Let me go to my other image because it gives me the timeline here. Remember, this image is a prophetic time that when he would, so you see the kingdom of Babylon, which is dated here around 605 to 539, which is about 60 something years, 66 years. Right? Then you have the Persian kingdom, which is about 539 to 331, and that's BC, so before Christ. So if you start with Christ and you work your way back, that's when you would see these kingdoms. Okay. The way we count the time. So the Grecian kingdom, which is Alexander the Great, and that's going to be important because that's what we're going to be studying in chapter 11 here in more detail. From BC 331 to 168, okay, which is about 200 years, something like that. And then we have the Roman kingdom, which starts around 168 to 168 BC to 476 AD, about 600 years. So one of the longest kingdoms. And then, as I said before, the feat of iron and clay has not happened yet. Now, one of the things I think is very important, one of the things I think is extremely important is fulfill prophecy. Like, to me, fulfill prophecy. And I think we should never let anyone despise the fact of fulfilled prophecy. You see today the Bible being under attack, the Christian faith under attack. And it is also under attack by those who were once Christian, ones who called themselves Christians. And So, which is kind of always funny to me. Uh, I don't know if they were actually true Christians, but what's funny to me is they spend an awful lot of time trying to debunk a, to them, imaginary or mythical person, someone who doesn't exist. They spend an awful lot of time. Their YouTube, um, their YouTube channel gets, thousands, tens of thousands of views. Okay, so they spend a lot of time on that. And one of the things they try to dismiss is the prophetic fulfillment. And I'm going to say, don't ever let anyone do that, because if you were living, and this is the thing right here, why is my faith so strong? One of the reasons is because our faith is based upon evidence. Now, what do I mean by evidence? God gives us evidence such as fulfilled prophecy. So that if this comes to pass, and I'm not talking about the false prophecies, and I'm talking about those who call themselves Christians today. Just like now, there are those who say, well, I prophesied that Trump was going to be assassinated or attempted assassinated. And they always do this after the fact, right? Like you never see any of these prophecies that will say, I predicted. Right now, watch this. So right now, what's the prophecy? Who's going to win the election? And you know what? Those who predicted that in 2020, because there were those who predicted that Trump was going to win in 2020, and they failed. Oops, right? Oops. So we're not talking about false prophets, and they are false prophets. True prophets, true biblical prophecies always come to pass. Always. And one of the things about prophecy, it strengthens our faith, because as we now look and remember this image, which is in Daniel chapter 2, this image is a prophetic timetable. From Daniel's perspective, he starts off in the kingdom of Babylon. He lives through into the kingdom of Persia. Okay, so he lived to be quite an old man if you stop and you think about it. So around, let's say 630, 605, and again, these dates, I don't know how accurate these dates are, but he actually goes into somewhere around the neighborhood of 521. So just with that, he's an old man by the time, and we'll get to this we will get to this when we get into, again, breaking down Daniel's prophecy. But what I wanted to kind of exhort is really the idea that what is faith strengthening to me is the prophecies that have come to pass. So let's kind of back up. If you were around the time of Hosea, remember, which is about 250 years, you would be able to say, okay, here's a prophecy. If you were around the time of Isaiah, you would see that some of the prophecies that God spoke have come to pass. Isaiah begins to prophesy around 120 years before the Babylonian Empire. Now, so from Jeremiah's perspective, he's living during this time that Isaiah has prophesied, besides the prophecy that God has given him. He utters a 70-year exile date, in which in Daniel chapter 9, we see Daniel reading and saying, oh, look, Jeremiah prophesied that the 70-year prophecies would last. I mean, the 70-year exile, or the exile would last 70 years. Oh, 70 years are almost up. The angel gives him a 70 weeks prophecy, which says that when Cyrus, the king of the Medes and Persia, issued the decree that begins this 70-week prophecy, which 69 of those weeks brings us to the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. So my point is, you see how fulfilled prophecy, as we look back on some 2,500 years ago from these prophecies, we can look back, we can say, look at all of the prophecies, the true prophets that have come to pass. We've already seen that 4 of these kingdoms that were specifically prophesied about have come to pass. That's what strengthens my faith. One of the reasons, okay? One of the reasons which strengthens my faith. All right, so in the 11th chapter of Daniel, when he says here, in the 11th chapter of Daniel, he says, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to strengthen and protect him. Now I will tell you the truth. Now, so here's Daniel, and remember his book, especially from chapters 7 to 12, are a collection of prophecies given to Daniel over the years. Okay, given to Daniel over the years. So like in chapter 10, you remember this was given in the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia. And so the time frame between chapter 10 and verse 11 is somewhere around the neighborhood, anywhere from, 5 to 9 years between the 2 kings, depending on how you want to date it. So if you just say Cyrus the Great, so in his first year of Cyrus, and again, these dates here, they vary depending on who the scholar is, okay? I'm looking at kind of a list of the kings of Mede and Persians right here. And you see this one here has Cyrus reigning from 559 BC to 530. So then if you skip down to Darius, then this is 521 to 587. Now we're going to come back to this kind of list right here because it's going to be important to sort of the prophecy here. But as you can see, there's again, Daniel, besides living, that's what I wanted here. Besides living pretty much a long life and through these 2 world kingdoms, at least the beginning of the Medes and the Persians. So this, in the 10th chapter here, remember we talked about, it really just reveals the spiritual warfare that goes on, that behind the scenes in the spiritual realm. So and now, so we kind of get back on track to some of the prophecies that he's going to give, which we will get into in the next study, obviously. Okay. Yeah, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. See you in the next study.